is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Part of the Million Coaches Challenge wasn't just to train the million coaches, but was to make these broader system-wide calls. Like, how do we actually make quality coaching the new standard? How do we create a new world where every coach is coming in, not just with the training, but a whole coach development journey? Part of that journey is community and mentorship. That's, I think, hopefully a next phase for the Million Coaches Challenge. Now that we've hit that million mark, hopefully draw some attention to the issue. Now let's invest in those institutional solutions that can help from the top down while we continue that bottom up.
Kevin Connors is the managing director at Susan Crown Exchange, where he oversees grant making, leads new initiatives, and co-develops organizational strategy. Kevin has helped lead the Million Coaches Challenge, a national initiative launched by the Susan Crown Exchange in 2021 to transform youth sports by training 1 million coaches in evidence-based youth development practices, backed by 18-plus partners, including the Aspen Institute's Project Play and research led by the American Institutes for Research. The Million Coaches Challenge is transforming youth sports by equipping coaches with the information and tools to create positive, inclusive environments that help young people build confidence, belonging, and life skills through sport. Coaches, you've got a game plan for your team, but do you have one for your money? That's where Wealth for Coaches comes in. Each week, we'll deliver simple, no-fluff financial tips made just for coaches. Whether you're getting paid for camps, training sessions, or a full season, Wealth for Coaches helps you track it, save it, and grow it. It's time to stop guessing and start building. Subscribe now at wealthforcoaches.beehive.com/subscribe and follow us on Twitter at Wealth for Coaches for daily money wins. Your money needs a coach. Start with Wealth for Coaches.
Hi, this is Dan Evans, head men's basketball coach at the University of North Georgia, and you're listening to the Hoop Heads podcast.
Are you or an athlete you know planning to go D3? Check out the D3 recruiting playbook from D3 Direct. Their playbook gives you a clear step-by-step roadmap to the recruiting process, what coaches value, key milestones from early high school through application season, and how to build a targeted list of schools that fit your needs. The playbook demystifies researching D3 programs and how to stand out without chasing every camp or showcase. The modules cover things like writing emails to coaches, building an effective highlight tape, using social media well, planning camps and visits, and navigating application strategy. You'll get templates, checklists, and an outreach plan to communicate confidently, learn how to compare financial packages, and avoid common missteps. By the end, you'll have a prioritized school list and a decision framework you can use to land your best fit opportunity. Click on the link in the show notes to get your D3 recruiting playbook from D3 Direct. You'll want to take some notes as you listen to this episode with Kevin Connors, Managing Director at the Susan Crown Exchange and the Million Coaches Challenge. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel this morning, but I am pleased to be joined by Kevin Connors from the Susan Crown Exchange and the Million Coaches Challenge. Kevin, welcome into the Hoop Heads pod.
Hey, Mike, what's going on? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely excited to have you on. Looking forward to diving into some youth sports topics that are frequently things that we've touched on here on the pod, but want to get your expertise and see what you guys are doing to impact coaches and kids around the world who are participating in sports. So let's start by giving people an idea of what the Million Coaches Challenge is. Give us a quick overview of what the program's all about.
Yeah, happy to, and excited to have this time to talk about youth sports, right? Something we're doing in our professional lives here at Susan Crown Exchange and through Million Coaches, but just one of those issues that is like a tabletop issue, right? Like the table conversation every night for parents and families, including in our own household. We have 3 kids in youth sports right now. So happy to do that. Susan Crown Exchange is a grant-making foundation. We're a private foundation based out of Chicago. We work nationally, but we started work really intentionally in youth sports around 2018, right when I came into the foundation. And specifically, we were really fascinated in understanding which environments for young people were most influential for their own personal, social, and emotional development. We've done a lot of funding in other spaces, K-12 education, after school, but sports kept coming back to us through our own research, our own conversations, and our own personal experiences as one of those spaces that was really ripe for helping young people not just thrive on a field or a court, but off the court. After a little more research, we quickly understood that youth sports, as promising as it can be, sometimes doesn't live up to that promise. It has that unique ability to foster belonging, sense of purpose, resilience, and coaches are at the center of that. As we talk to coaches, many don't feel equipped to do that work. And in fact, as you look into the research, less than a third have been trained in just the basics of youth development, which is just the very foundation of what it might take to start that journey to becoming a great coach. So we stepped in as a national foundation and we said, what can we do to help close that gap? There's this gap between the influence a coach has and the training and preparation they receive. So we launched this nationwide call called the Million Coaches Challenge. We supported 18 organizations across the country who were banding together to collectively train 1 million coaches in youth development and mental health. And these were organizations that represented all aspects of the youth sports universe, from the U.S. Olympic Committee and NGB movement down to Little League and school sports and into rec and park. And so we learned a lot about what great coaching looks like and the common thread between all of those environments. And we were proud that this past fall, we hit that 1 million mark as a community.
And obviously, it's something that anybody who's listened to me talk here on the podcast, one of the things that I always say is a challenge, right, is that education piece, whether it's for coaches, and then I'll take it a step further, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But I also think just educating parents on understanding how valuable it is to have a coach who is educated. And sometimes parents don't understand the connection between a coach who has had some training and has some basic understanding of what coaching is all about versus the volunteer who maybe is a reluctant volunteer, would like to do well, but just doesn't have the experience that's necessary or doesn't have the training that's necessary in order to provide the kind of environment that you would like to see as a parent or that I would like to see as a parent. So we're going to dive into all those details here in a second. Before we do, just want to go through a little bit, Kevin, of your background and how you got to where you are. So kind of just take us through why athletics is important to you in your life and just take us through the steps of your career that led you to this point.
Oh, Mike, well, I got to go back to the very beginning, right, for that, as I'm sure you do. And I think about those days shooting hoops on the driveway at 9:30 p.m. in the summer as like the sun was going down in Chicago. I was the youngest of three boys. I grew up in a household that was all about sports. Both my parents were that way. We were competitive, a friendly level of competition, as you might imagine, with three boys out there. And I look back on my time like in formally as a player, and those experiences, good and bad and neutral, were the most formative ones of my life. I was successful in school and by all those classic metrics, but it was my teams, it was my coaches, it was the losses that really shaped me. And it's those lessons that I draw on now as a parent, as a coach, just as an employee. And so, sports were fundamental to who I was. I was a multi-sport athlete through high school. I went on to coach at the high school level. I'm now a youth sports coach. And so I think along the way, even implicitly, I learned a lot. And then once in a while, I was lucky to have that 1 in a million coach who really knew how to pull out the power of sport and help get the most out of me.
When you think about that person, what's the lesson or lessons that you take from that particular coach when you think about the influence that they had on you then that maybe is still carrying over into your life today? What's that advice? What's that thing? What is it that coach shared with you or put into you that you're still carrying around today?
I think the number one lesson for me is get to know your players, right? Understand how they work, what makes them tick, how to motivate them, what they all need. I mean, even in my own family, I'm very different than my middle brother. On the outside, we might appear very similar to friends and family, but actually what motivates us is very different. My middle brother, who's 3 years older than me, was the kind of player who wanted his football coach to grab his face mask and get in his face and light a fire. And I was kind of that quieter player who was like, I need you to come over, like recognize what I've been working towards, tell me what's working well, and tell me where I can improve. in very like just like rational, concrete ways. It was just different techniques. And I think as a player, I always recognize the coaches who were able to use different tactics with different folks. And in specific, like we're all going through something, even as kids. I think there's one conversation that stands out most to me about my playing experience that still sticks with me today as a parent and as a coach. And, my senior year of high school, I was playing varsity baseball. We were a pretty competitive team. We were a top ranked team in state. I was having a really strong season. And in the middle of it, my dad unexpectedly passed away. And after that happened, I went into, as you might imagine, like a deep slump, like just off the field, certainly, but even on the field. I was showing up to games, but I really wasn't all there. And we know baseball, perhaps more than any other, is all mental. And, I saw like my batting average drop from being one of the tops in the areas to like by almost 100 points over a 3-week span. And I was sitting in the middle of the lineup, hitting cleanup, and our team was suffering as a result of my own performance. And I remember one day my coaches just sat me down in the dugout before the game and just asked how I was. They said, how are you? Do you want to continue hitting in this space? What do you need outside of here? And it was just the first opportunity to kind of just talk openly, not even about baseball. And after that, everything came back to normal. And so it's just one of those moments. Understand your players, what motivates them, what they're going through. And that's one of those lessons I see in great coaches today, and I'm trying to apply throughout my life.
It's a great story. And it's one that I think rings true to anybody who has been a coach, who's been a player, who's been a teacher, right? You have a large background in education, as do I. And one of the things that I always say when it comes to education specifically is when I think about the people that had the biggest influence on me as teachers or as coaches, it's not the person who was the best technical teacher of algebra, or not the person who taught me how to conjugate verbs as an English teacher. It's the person who, like your coach did, when you have a tragedy and your father passes away, and that coach comes up and says, puts their arm around you and says, "Hey, what are you going through? How can we help? What do you need?" Those are the same people that I remember, right? It's the teacher or the coach who pulls you aside before class, after practice, and says something to you. "Hey, what's going on in your life?" Or, "Hey, I heard this is happening," good or bad, right? They get to know you. They want to know you as more than just a basketball player or a baseball player or whatever it may be, or a student. They want to know you as a person, not just a kid in their class. And those are the people that we remember. You don't remember the technical geniuses who they had all the X's and O's and this, or they were tremendous about breaking down how to solve this variable equation, whatever it might be. Those people who cared about you are the ones that you really remember and that that have an impact on you. And I think sometimes that gets lost in education, right? In so much of how we measure the success of a teacher, right? It's based on test scores, and there's all this metrics, and you can crunch numbers forever, which I'm sure you did in some of your previous roles, right? You're looking at numbers and statistics and all these things. And yet there's that human element as a teacher that can't necessarily be measured by a set of numbers. And I think coaching in a lot of ways is the same, in that you can have coaches who win a lot, that know a lot of X's and O's, that attract a lot of people to their program, but they may not be having the biggest impact, again, because parents don't understand exactly what it is that they should be looking for in a good coach. And it's really, I think, one of the biggest challenges is how do we get people to see and hear the story like the one that you told, and know that that's a great coach, even though, and that coach may have been a great baseball coach from a technical standpoint, or maybe they weren't as good as somebody across the road, but because they were there for you as a human being, that's what sets them up to be able to have success as a coach. And I think that's something that when I look at coaching, and I know that when I look at what you're doing with the Million Coaches Challenge, and you have the things that make up a good coach, the first I think 7 of your 12 principles just relate to setting the foundation of building a relationship with the players who are part of your team. It has nothing to do with your technical knowledge of basketball or baseball or football. And so I just think that's so critical. And it's the piece I think that people miss so often. Do you see that in the research? Does the research say that we're missing that human element, that human touch?
It does, and it at least says that coaches want it and coaches don't feel like they're getting the support to do it. And support, I think, to us, and Mike, you tell me, especially in all the different environments you've currently and have been a part of, like college basketball, elite level basketball, you have kids who've gone through the systems. But the sense is that no matter which environment you're in, the foundation is the foundation of good coaching. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from working with such a diverse set of partners in youth sport, is that there was this recognition that, coaching is hard and good coaching is good coaching at the end of the day. Sure, we might turn up the dial a little bit on what that competition looks like, or how how much we're focusing on skills and tactics. But that foundation needs to be there to have any sustainable, really transformational effect. We did we had some partners, we supported some partners to run some national research. And, some of those just top line numbers really jump off the page at you. And, it was, for young athletes, coaches are the most trusted person in their life outside of family. We also know from a national coach survey that we helped support a few years back that surveyed more than 10,000 coaches across the country in different contexts. Less than 20% of coaches feel confident in recognizing off the field stressors, helping reduce performance anxiety, linking athletes to external resources, helping them navigate just the pressures of social media, which is this whole separate but very interrelated space now, and so different from 20 years ago when my friends and I were kind of navigating this space. And so coaches recognize the influence they have. They're in it for the right reasons, but they don't feel like they're getting that support culturally within their institutions. The expectations maybe from parents, or literally just the nuts and bolts of what are the training resources? What are the tactics I can use to actually help build bonding among my teammates? How can I get to know my athletes if I have 12 on a basketball team or 15, or if I have 100 on a football team? So there's a need to customize all that, but you got to spend your time there, just like I did when I was in the classroom as a high school teacher too. You couldn't make those assumptions that kids were ready just to trust you and to believe in you. You really had to work at it intentionally.
I couldn't agree more. And I do think that is step one, is getting your students, your players to buy into you as a human being. And that happens because you've bought into them as human beings. And that's not something that people intuitively know how to do. I do think there are some people that are natural born teachers, not that you can't work to develop your skills, but there are some people who have a great understanding of empathy and the ability to connect with kids easier. It comes more naturally to them. But then there are a lot of people who, with the proper training, with just being told that, hey, this is something that you need to do in order to be able to reach and connect, that there's such a possibility to increase the satisfaction of the kids who are participating in youth sports through just this. And again, it has nothing to do with the technical aspects of teaching or coaching a particular sport. So let's talk about what you guys are doing in this realm. Once you identify that, hey, this is a key skill that coaches need to have, tell me about some of the conversations that you've had within the Susan Crown Exchange, within the Million Coaches Challenge leadership, about, hey, what do? We recognize that this is something that coaches need. What are the conversations like about how do we get them what we need? And then talk about some of the things that you're trying to do with the different organizations you work with.
Yeah, I think this question, like, how do you actually bring the knowledge exists, right? The resources exist, or the exemplars exist. We can think about our own lives, those transformational coaches, or we can look at all-time greats, right, who have written books, or we can look at coaches who are elevated right now during March Madness, right, who are in their post-game pressers lifting up actually the youth development. You hear the players talk about their coach. And those stories are just baked into sports. They move us. Oftentimes they are what stays with us, like the story I shared. And at the same time, like what actually builds the skills are like the everyday practices and the environment that coaches are building. So the question is like not how do we develop more content, which there always will be more, more to share, more to create, but it's really how do we bring these practices and how do we create a culture? How do we create a culture in youth sports that prioritizes them? And I'm so curious, Mike, like how you think youth sports from, again, elite to recreational kind of navigates this balance. For the longest time, it's health and safety, it's sports skills and tactics. And while we might say what makes one in a million coaches are kind of like that life development skill, the ability to bring that out, it's not a formal part of the education experience. It's not a formal part of the evaluation experience. It's not a formal part of just youth sports culture, right? And the perception, that when parents are signing up their kids for sports, that there kind of is this standard that like, that's an outcome. I want my kids to develop a sense of teamwork and to learn how to overcome adversity. And rather than hope for that, is there a way for that to become just part of the everyday expectation and standard? And our work says coaches want that. Coaches want to be empowered to be their best selves so they can help their coaches. So, right now, it's just such a fragmented landscape in youth sports. We all can talk about how there's really no federal oversight, state level oversight. It's really an organization by organizational system. And the train is really far outside the station. And we have lots of different factors, right? More pay to play models are becoming more important. We now have private equity money in youth sports. There are fewer and fewer just like low cost, but still quality options. We see much more of a movement to travel sports for the majority of kids, at least in the area where I am. And so much has changed, but we have to work at this from multiple levels. Like, we just need organizations out there who are ready to train coaches, right? And there's a few of those in Million Coaches Challenge, Positive Coaching Alliance, the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport. They are just coach training organizations. They will come partner with you, come up with a coach development plan for your group, bring training to coaches. And they can do that for a host of different types of contexts. And then we had some who were they were the institutions themselves. It's the U.S. Olympic Committee. It's Little League. Those organizations have the power of their own organizational policies that they can work through. And as part of the Million Coaches, Little League put in place requirements for any tournament coaches to go through and complete their Diamond Leader program, which was their customized training program for Little League coaches. So there's all that while you're also working on the big long-term goals of like, what is actual, like, what's smart policy look like here? How do we start to shift the culture of youth sports to really prioritize this and make the definition of a good coach a three-legged stool instead of a two-legged one? What do you? Yeah.
So here's what I will say.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of different arms of this thing that they're all going in different directions, and it makes it challenging to bring everybody into what we all might agree are the best things if we could all sit down in a room together. It's hard to get all those pieces into the room together. And here's what I mean by that. So first of all, the youth sports landscape, as you said, is completely fragmented with no oversight. And so if Kevin is in Chicago and you're running your own travel baseball program, and there might be 25 or 30 or 50 or 100 other travel baseball programs in Chicago, right? So now we're not just talking about trying to get an initiative into travel baseball in Chicago. We now have to not just penetrate one organization, we have to penetrate 100. And then you take that and extrapolate it across the entire country. Now you've got to get a lot of people to be like-minded about what this thing has to look like. So I think that is a challenge, right? Because as much as we all would like to believe that everybody wants the situation to be like this, because we're so fragmented and because a lot of youth sports now, unfortunately, as you said, private equity, people want to make profits, people run businesses. And again, I have no problem with people running a youth sports business. I run one myself, hopefully with the idea that my ideals are closer to the ideals that we're talking about on the podcast today, as opposed to some other situations. But I think that fragmentation is a challenge, because how do you penetrate all those different areas, those different groups, get them to see the value in having their coaches be trained? So that's the first thing. Then I think the second part of that is that despite what we all say publicly as parents, parents are typically attracted to, if it's a travel program, they're attracted not to great development and great relationships between coaches. What they see on social media or what they hear from their friends is not about, hey, Susie had a great time in this basketball program. She really improved and got better. And then the parent says, well, what was Susie's record this season? Well, Susie's team they went 12-25. And then that parent is like, well, that program's for losers. I don't want to be associated with that, even though we know that whatever Susie's record is as a fourth grade basketball player has no relevance to what kind of basketball player she's going to be eventually, let alone what kind of person she's going to be. And so there's this idea, at least what I see, is that people still unfortunately chase winning because they don't necessarily know better. And then to go back to the fragmentation piece, right? People provide winning by being good recruiters, which is different from being a good coach or a good organization that has in mind the best for the long-term development of the players. And then that goes to my last piece of this, which is not only do we have to train and educate coaches, but I think that even a bigger challenge than that, from my perspective, is to be able to educate parents about what they should look for, what a good coach and a good program looks like. Because I think so often what people see, Kevin, is the record or the posts on social media, the tournament wins, this was the score of this game. And then they're like, well, look, this team won this tournament. Let me go and join that program. And maybe that organization has won lots of tournament championships or whatever it might be, but maybe that team at your kid's grade level has 12 teams, and maybe their best one or two teams have really good coaches, and maybe their last four teams have coaches who have no training, and that environment is suboptimal. And so parents just don't know or understand what it is that they should look for. And that adds a layer of complication, right, to what you guys are doing, where you can educate the coaches, but then if parents don't understand that this is the kind of coach we want, and they just keep running to the programs that are good at recruiting, but not necessarily good at coaching and developing kids, now that's where there's a disconnect. And I don't know how much you've talked to people about those issues.
Yeah, we need a values alignment between parents, organizations, and coaches. And I think if you put each of those groups in a room together, you would find that values alignment. But it's when you say, well, what do you think others are prioritizing in this space? Or what do you think the current environment? You may want to promote youth development as a core tenet of your program, but you feel like you are required or feel a sense of pressure to deliver on the wins or the number of scholarships you're producing or X, Y, Z. And so there is a disconnect. And I think that values alignment is really essential. We are very careful. Like we're not out there are no villains to us in this system, right? Like we all are here because we have a love of sport. We believe it changed our lives. We believe it can produce really positive outcomes for our young kids. It's the symptoms of just such a fractured environment in youth sports and changing culture. And I even think about parents, my own personal life, like, elementary school kids, we're all signing up our kids for sports. And there's definitely that sense of like, fear of missing out, right? Oh, you're doing this elite soccer camp this summer and your kids have played indoor and on this club team. And next year, playing time is not guaranteed to be equal. Do I need to keep my son involved so that he's not left behind? There was all of that. And that's so natural. I think that's one of the most important things, just like all of us to take a breath, like you're not alone. It's okay to feel these tensions, whether I'm an organizational leader or I'm a parent. But it's also hard when there's no clear metrics of success outside of wins and scholarships and points on the scoreboard. And it's like those metrics to me are like one of the things that makes sports so potentially powerful. Like we do have measurable outcomes in sports, and the authenticity of actually playing for something quote unquote meaningful is what I think helps create the environment for like the relationships and the resilience and all the teamwork to actually mean something for kids. Like that's the dynamo, that's the unique combination of it. But it's when that dial is turned up too much on those measurable outcomes where we kind of get out of whack, especially if that's happening at young ages, but even into high school, right? Like burnout is real. We know we're working through youth mental health crisis. We know kids are feeling pressure from all angles, more than they ever have. And so I think the lack of a clear definition of success is one of those challenges. And, we don't have certified coaches. If we had certified coaches, you could tell parents, hey, look for a program that has certified coaches, in a very simple world. And maybe that would help them vote with their feet. But until we have something like that, that's a kind of a clear delineation. It's hard for parents. I really empathize with all of us. We fall into this trap every night, as a set of parents. Are we doing this right? We know in our hearts, my wife's a social worker. We know what is right and what is good for children's development. Are we even doing it right? It's a challenge for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny to hear you say that, are we doing it right? Because I think just in your normal life as a parent, right, we're all flying by the seat of our pants trying to figure out, are we doing it right? Just forget about sports, but just in general as being a parent. And then I think when it comes to sports, I think about that all the time because as a parent and as somebody who was as an athlete pretty driven to practice and work on my own and do things, and you realize that all of your kids, even though they came from the same two parents and they live in the same household, that everybody's different in terms of their want to, in terms of what their likes are, in terms of this and that. And just like you, I feel like through the experiences that I've had, that I've been able to, I know what's right and wrong, at least as much as anybody can. I've been experienced. I've talked to so many people through the podcast and just whatever. But there are still times where I do things or I find myself wanting to do things with my kids that I don't end up doing, that I know are probably not beneficial. And yet I still have a hard time not wanting to do that. Like, I'll give you a great example. And my kids were younger, not so much anymore. My son's in college now. My youngest daughter is 16. So they both have kind of taken over they're either driving, going to work out and doing the things that they're doing. I'm no longer driving that. If they want me to come and, hey, Dad, can you come, work out with me, or can you come rebound for me or whatever, I'm there. But there was a certain point when they were younger, right, in elementary school, where if they were going to go to the gym, it was because Dad was going to drive them or Mom was going to drive them or whatever. And there were times where I would be going to the gym to do some kind of basketball program or whatever. And I'd say, hey, you guys want to, you want to come along and you can get some shots up, and they'd say no. And I would be like, I'd look at it like, what do you mean? Like when I was a kid, if I would have had access to a gym, I would have killed for that kind of access. And there's a part of me that wanted to be like, you're coming. Like, I don't care whether you want to or not. I'm bringing you with me. I knew that was wrong, and I didn't end up dragging him with me, but I knew better, and I still wanted to. Like, it still took everything I had, Kevin, to just hold myself back from not wanting to, quote unquote, force them to do things. And so then I think somebody with my experience just in the game, also as a teacher and as a coach. And I still am struggling with that fear of missing out, that, hey, you can't take a day off. You got to go and do this, or there's this program or whatever. If I'm struggling with that, imagine a parent who doesn't have nearly the experience that I have, what a struggle that is for them. And I think that's a position that I'm sure when you talk to parents in what your day-to-day is, that you're hearing that a lot, I'm guessing.
Yeah, like there's almost like a set, like a permission structure, I think, that's needed for parents right now. And we all literally live in communities and are in community with one another and often make decisions as a community. And so it can start like, we don't have to, sure, a Million Coaches Challenge, we're working nationally. But at the end of the day, youth sports is a community driven experience for kids, especially in the early days of elementary school. Like many of us are still in Park District and Little League and so forth. And so, I feel like that helps reduce a little bit of the complexity and sense of like overwhelm when you think of how do I fix this system and the culture. That culture is in some ways built by those of us who are in it right now, and the 10 parents in our elementary school, and what we're all on a text thread together. We could potentially decide as a group what kind of league and experience we want for our kids. And so, like those aren't scalable ways to fix the system. And we're now doing some philanthropic funding at systems level stages, which we can get into. But at the end of the day, like those are years in the making. I think as parents, what I want to know is I don't want to stay up till midnight again talking about my son's flag football experience. I want to know how to fix that tomorrow and seek out a more positive one. And so, a lot of this is like a sense of permission. How do we give parents better information so they can make better decisions more often, right? Again, there's that grace in there. It's hard. So I think quite a bit about that. And the same would go for coaches, right? Like coaches don't deserve to be on islands. And I could train an individual coach, or one of our partners could train an individual coach on best practices in youth development. But if their organization doesn't prioritize that, or their parents aren't doing that, or they don't sense that those are priorities, they're going to hit a wall, right? And maybe experience some burnout too. So we have to come at it from all angles. But I think sports is something where like we can change practice tomorrow, even with our teams that are currently underway.
Give me an example of a success story through the Million Coaches Challenge in this kind of area that we've been talking about, whether it's a particular organization, a particular coach, an initiative that you guys have. Give me a success story from this, again, not technical side of coaching, but the side of coaching that just says, I've got to connect with players. I've got to be a human being with them first before I can teach them how to shoot a layup or teach them how to throw a curveball.
There are two that jump to mind. One is in your home state of Ohio. So Ohio State University, Life Sports, and the Ohio High School Athletic Association are key partners in Million Coaches. And they're leading some incredible work across the state, primarily working with high school districts who are trying to institutionalize these practices, training opportunities, and really bake this into their model of what quality coaching looks like. Ohio has been really incredible to me because they have done a great job tailoring their messaging to different communities and understanding like, who are the messengers? How can we talk about these issues, particularly around mental health, in ways that are resonating and will connect? Because we know that these are universal challenges in many cases, but the way we have to approach these and talk about them and support them is different. Just a few weeks ago, we received just some updates and short videos from the team at OSU of high school coaches who talked about supporting their young athletes through very serious mental health concerns, and where they're almost that from to statement. They moved from a space before training and support where they didn't feel equipped to kind of navigate those conversations, and B, didn't know if it was their role. And then after receiving support and training and just being equipped with a few tangible prompts, questions to ask, responses that you can have in those environments before you refer or hand off or connect with parents, there were success stories of supporting kids who were struggling mightily with what the next day might look like in their own lives. And those are really powerful examples at one end of the spectrum of like, how can you actually be a first line provider for your young people? And we're in, like I mentioned earlier, we're in this youth mental health crisis across the US. My wife's a social worker. As much as I'd love there to be more social workers, we know there will never be enough social workers to meet the need. And so we need these other creative ways, non-clinical ways to support that first stage, right? To either build all the skills ahead of time that help you navigate those when you encounter, or use sport and its unique properties to help you heal from trauma and stress. Coaches can be that. And so this Ohio example of hearing a coach go on their own journey about their role and confidence in supporting in those really challenging situations was one. And then I just look at my own experience. I was a young varsity head coach, Mike. I was 25 in St. Louis. I had applied to be an assistant varsity coach, noting like I had such a lack of experience, and the AD offered me the head job, to which I said, I think you'll have better candidates. And he said, are you sure? Like, here's the pile of resumes. You're now the head coach. And I walked into that season very, just very confident. Like, I played at a high level. I had really strong coaches, my own experience, and I felt ready. Now knowing that I wasn't, I felt ready for the job, right? I had planned out my practices. I had the old sheet of signs and, like what the first 2 weeks would look like. And it was all baseball oriented. And 2 weeks into the season, my star player and I were just at odds with one another. And this was a school that I taught at, and a school where I had very strong relationships with my students in the classroom. But my star player and I were just at odds with one another. To the point where he stopped coming to practice, where there were disruptions in practice, where I wasn't responding effectively. And one day I called one of my old coaches and I said, what advice do you have for me? And he stepped back and he just said, hey, look, Kevin, you got to remember, you don't coach baseball, you coach kids. And the next day at practice, I just pulled that player aside during warm-ups and we just took a walk around the diamond and just talked what his story was, why he played baseball, what that connection was, and slowly rebuilt that relationship. So by the end of the season, I was his biggest advocate, driving him to and from college visits, all of those things. And it was like, you don't have to be on an island, and especially when you're young or you're a volunteer. There's a lot there's a lot of supports available if you can find them, if you know to look for them. And so that's part of the equation here. And so we can think about the most serious situations where coaches are truly stepping in a crisis. And then there's other situations where like, hey, there was kind of a mess of my own making that in retrospect didn't need to happen. And luckily I was able to get some advice to turn that around.
I think that goes to being self-aware, right? That you are analyzing what it is that you're doing as a coach or as a teacher and trying to figure out, am I being as effective as I can be, which again has nothing to do with the technical aspects of coaching your sport. It has to do with reflecting and thinking about the practices that you're doing on a daily basis and whether or not those are the most impactful that they can be, and then reevaluating and figuring out, all right, hey, what can I do differently? Maybe I do just need to, maybe it's as simple as I just take a walk and get to know this kid, and we start to build that relationship, and then that starts to turn things around, not just between us as two human beings, but also then allows that player to perform better on the court or on the field, whatever the case may be. And I think that's a big piece of it. And I know that's one of, again, the other different things that on your website, Million Coaches Challenge, it talks about just doing the inner work of coaching, right? Which is you managing yourself as a human being. Before, we're talking about managing kids, right? And understanding their emotions and what they need. But then a lot of times, and you've said it a couple times here while we've been talking, is a lot of times you feel like you're on an island. I think coaching is like that. I think teaching is like that, right? In the classroom, you close your door and it's you and the kids. And sometimes you feel like you're the only person in the entire world that's going through those experiences with those kids in your classroom. And I think coaches, a lot of times, especially if you don't have coaching friends, if you're early in your career where you may not have built that network around, you can feel like this is the first time any coach has ever gone through this situation. And yet there's not very much new that comes through under the sun that somebody somewhere hasn't experienced before. And it's just a matter of being able to, as you said, find those resources. So talk a little bit about that self-awareness piece and the impact they can have, just helping coaches to regulate and understand themselves better, which allows them to be better for the players that they coach. Talk about that piece.
Well, I think you know, I think data and numbers are really powerful here to understand you're not alone, right? And there's a need. We talked about the quantifiable metrics that we have with the wins, losses, points, turn, all that stuff. But there's a dearth of data just about the youth sport experience and around coaching. There's a few surveys out there. We've been a part of a couple of those. The base is growing, but it's really shining a light. And I think one of the biggest ahas is like, all right, like coaches are coming from a good place, and is a universal challenge that they feel they're seeking more support. And so to know that, it's not just me who wants concrete resources on how to have that first conversation about mental health with a student who appears to be struggling. It's not just me who wants to reach out to, who wants to have a constructive conversation with parents about a young person who isn't showing up right. It's not just me who feels kind of at a loss of how to connect to my students who maybe I don't live in their community or have different life experiences. And so I think that is really powerful. And then it helps equip them with maybe the agency to go seek out resources or to have more courageous conversations with their athletic directors or whoever that supervisor is about what they need, and hopefully begin more than just access to training. Like one of our biggest takeaways, Mike, and I'm curious how you do this in Head Start with all the coaches you hire and the environment you set up. One of our biggest takeaways and why we felt so, I think, like loyal to this group who came together is this was a coach training initiative. And to a T, every one of them will say, yeah, but training alone doesn't work. Training is just the start. It just helps raise the floor a little bit. And I think that gets to what we said earlier about the culture of the institution. And even here, like, who are my mentors? Who is that community of coaches? And those are practices that organizations can put into place, and really effective ones already are. And it's not sports specific, right? That those are effective businesses, those are effective schools. Like, how do we create those environments where coaches can say, I can be vulnerable with my fellow coaches, and it doesn't always have to be a high level competition among us. And so we need those spaces. And part of the Million Coaches Challenge wasn't just to train the million coaches, but was to make these broader system wide calls. Like, how do we actually make quality coaching like the new standard? So rather than the million who eventually might churn out of this system, then we create a new world where every coach is coming in, not just with the training, but a whole coach development journey, right? And part of that journey is community and mentorship. And so that's, I think, hopefully a next phase for the Million Coaches Challenge. Now that we've hit that million mark, hopefully draw some attention to the issue. Now let's invest in those institutional solutions that can help working from the top down while we continue that bottom up.
It's a critical mass thing, right? Where now you have a community of people that can interact with each other. They can see other people who are doing it maybe differently than what they experienced when they were playing, or maybe differently from the organization down the road. And I think that's always the challenge. So as an organization for us at Head Start Basketball, so I'm not necessarily running teams. I'm running a week-long camp where a coach will come in and you'll have a group and you're doing stations and you're working with the kids and that kind of thing. Different than coaching a team from a standpoint of there's not playing time issues, there's not organizing a practice, but there is putting together a station that works. It is getting to know the kids. Like, one of the things, honestly, Kevin, that I'm known for at my camp, and this is just something that I've done from the time I started it, is I'll have whatever number of kids I have at the camp. It could be 40, it could be 80, it could be 100. By the second day of the camp, I know every one of those kids' names. So that when on day 2, when a kid and their mom walks into camp, obviously the first day you're checking people in and whatever. And then I spend that first day as kids come to my station, or sometimes if I'm just overseeing the whole camp and I'm not coaching at a specific basket, I'm just walking around trying to learn those kids' names. So the next day when the kid comes in and he's with his mom or he's with his dad or grandma or whatever, and I can say, hey, Johnny, how you doing? Good to see you again today. And the mom is looking around going, there's 100 kids here. How does this guy know my kid? And I've already engendered good feelings for that family, which one is good for them from a just every kid likes to hear their name, right? It's the same thing as a teacher, right? You want to every day when somebody says your name, that's everybody's favorite word is hearing somebody in authority say their name positively and smile at them and give them a high five. So you have that. From a business standpoint, I've just now impressed that mom, like, wow, this guy knows my kid. I don't know if he's teaching basketball or not. I have no idea. I'm not here while he's doing that, but I know he knows my kid. So he at least put some time into getting to know him. And then it's also when I'm talking about being able to have a positive environment. If a kid is doing something that I like, now I can say, hey, Johnny, great job. I like the way you're working over there. Or if Johnny's doing something he's not supposed to do, I don't have to just yell, hey, you, and run over and I can just call his name and boom, I can correct whatever the behavior is. So that's an example of something that I try to model for the coaches who are a part of my camp. We talk about all the time. You may not be able to get all 100 names the way I do, but you should certainly know as many kids as you possibly can. And if you have a group that is kind of your home group, you should know every kid's name in that home group so that you can talk to them and get to know them. And that's just one little example of kind of what we're talking about here, where how do you set what that environment looks and feels like for the kids where everybody feels welcome. And again, we're not even talking about the coaching basketball part. We're just talking about being able to understand what provides a quality environment that makes people want to come back. And then, of course, you try to model and just talk about, hey, here's how you interact with kids and here's what you do. And sometimes I'll have an intern program where maybe you have a kid who's younger that is going to eventually become a coach. Maybe they went to camp and now they're coming back to help out. And so you pair them with somebody who's a coach. And then eventually when they get to be a junior or senior in high school, then maybe I hire them and then they're on the payroll. And now they've worked with somebody who they've seen do things in the right way. And that's the kind of small steps, I think, right, that you're talking about, where it's not just me thrown in, hey, go do your thing. There's a connection between the greater organization and then what that specific coach is doing, if that makes any sense.
Two things that jump out to me, Mike, and thanks for at a separate conversation. You have to give me the strategies for learning 100 names.
There isn't one. So there isn't one. People always ask me, like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And honestly, the only answer that I have is it matters to me, right? So if I met you at a coffee shop somewhere and got introduced to you because my friend was friends with you, the odds of me remembering your name would be probably fairly low because I'm just not as invested in that particular piece of it. So I'm invested in learning every kid's name. And then all I do is I just keep walking around, and every time that I'm at a station or at a group, I just keep tapping kids on the head. John, Mary, Tom, whatever. I just keep saying them. So it's repetition and making it important to you. That's the only trick. So
I love that. Think about it, like that what matters to you actually comes to fruition. Like it's such a great life lesson, but also so different than like the old high school football days. Everyone, when the coaches would put our names on our helmets, and it was like week 2 of doubles when you finally made a big hit and they'd rip off. They're like, all right, I know your name now. You earned your ripped off.
That's funny.
So I love that. Thanks for sharing that. But two things jumped out as you were sharing your story. One is how simple the answers can be, right? Like, we're not asking coaches to become PhDs in youth development or athlete-centered coaching. Like, that's not reasonable. It's not wanted. It's not needed. What you described, just knowing a young person's name, is such a concrete, actionable step that makes an enormous difference for that young person. So that's what a lot of the Million Coaches calls to action and practices are. And that or those sets of recommendations are the result of all 18 organizations coming together and finding common ground. Again, like, organizations working in so many different spaces said, you know what? Yes, like, no matter which type of environment, what level of competition, boys, girls, team sports, individual sports, knowing someone's name is really critical. Being predictable with your practices in your schedule isn't just helpful for your coaching staff, it's actually wired into young people's brains. They need that level of predictability. It helps them thrive and grow and stay regulated. And so those are like simple practices that I think is like a really important part to enter the conversation with. This is not the classic rocket science. This is how do I show up and help people feel seen and valued? Because then the second part that jumped out is you said, hey, if you're at camp and someone is not doing what they're supposed to do because you started to build a relationship, you can have the harder conversation. And isn't that what all coaches ultimately need to be able to do? To have really hard, challenging conversations with their players, maybe to help them grow as individuals. And sometimes as you get older and more in the system, to actually win games and actually to actually succeed on the court, which is one of those misnomers. Sometimes folks will look at us in this initiative like, oh, you just kind of want to get rid of competition. It's all about youth development. Like, no. The competition is actually what makes sports so beautiful and powerful. And there is a place and time for that, especially as you get into it. But these practices help you win. If you are in an environment where state championships matter to your school and your job security, knowing kids' names and having relationships so that you can have that really courageous conversation is what allows you to succeed and allows that young person to actually take in what you're saying and feel motivated to change. So you're living it every day. And it's one of those pieces to keep drilling in because there's a whole lot of assumptions and prior experiences. We're all coming from different spaces. So how do we meet people where they are and say, I understand your outcomes and what you need, what your metrics of success are. These practices will still help you get there.
Yeah, I think that's a huge misconception. And I'm glad you brought that to the forefront, that a lot of times when people think about just some of the things that we've been talking about today on the pod, right? The knowing kids' names, the ability to have conversations and connect, right? The quote, people think those soft skills, right? That those soft skills, there's a misconception that those don't lead to winning. And I think the research would tell you that when you have connection between player and coach, when players are connected to one another, that type of culture and that type of connection, not only does it provide for a positive experience, it also provides for a better opportunity to win. And then I'll take this, Kevin, one step further in that my experience as an athlete, my experience as a coach, my experience as a parent, and I'm sure you can attest to this, that in the moment, right, when you're playing, when you're coaching, when you're watching your kid play, while you're watching that game or playing that game or coaching that game, in the moment, what feels like the most important thing is the win or the loss or your own performance or your child's performance or your team's performance. That feels like it's the most important thing in the moment. And yet, when I look back upon my career as a player or my career as a coach, just as an example, college basketball, I probably played in 110 games as a college player. There's maybe 5, 6, 7 of those games that I can honestly say I remember specific details from those games. The rest of them, you could ask me, hey, how'd you guys do against such and such a team when you were a junior? What was your game like? I would have no idea whatsoever, whether we won, whether we lost, did I play well, did I not? All that stuff is lost to history. But what's not lost to history is the overall general feeling of the experience and the people that I was with. And sometimes those experiences are good. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're not as good. But if we could give everybody the opportunity to look back on their participation on a team 5 years out and say, my experience was a good one, that's, I think, what we're pointing for. Yet in the moment, we all get caught up in our individual performance and the wins and losses. And it's important to sometimes take a step back and say, 5 years from now, this game and my performance isn't going to matter that much. What's going to matter is my teammates, my relationships with my coaches, just the feeling that I had in the environment that was created. And it's hard to keep that in perspective, right? I'm sure you can relate to that piece of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine you can extend that same kind of retrospective look to coaches, right? Like as I get further into my coaching career, what stood out to me? Are there specific seasons or games? Maybe. But like, how was I defining success then? And how do I define it now? And I'd say we would land much more on these life skills, these soft skills, like those things. Like this team came together. It stayed with me because this team bonded like one I've never seen before. This team in 06 sticks with me because they overcame so much adversity that season. And those are the things that we know in our heart of hearts lead to success and are fulfilling experiences for us as coaches too. And so how do we preempt that 20-year look back, right? Like, how do we do that now while I'm in the job? And for the younger coaches, how do we help prompt some of that? And again, it goes back, there's a lot of pressure, especially young coaches or even volunteer coaches. Like, how do we make sure they're equipped with the guidance from mentors or their or others in their organization? Like, these are important. And in best case, hey, we're gonna hold you accountable in some ways for that work. Like, we are gonna find ways to measure or determine whether these teams are bonding or whether their relationships growing, et cetera, because it's gonna help me, right? Not as I got you. That's not why we're in this profession. Like, it's gonna help me and it's gonna help us all lead to our ultimate outcomes.
Right, which goes to, again, being self-aware. You talked about being willing to go in and have a difficult conversation and get some feedback, right? I think about that as a teacher, right? We don't have all the answers. Are you a teacher who's willing to go in and talk to your principal and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me to be able to do this better? Or I'm having trouble with this kid. Can you come in and watch and help me to figure that out? And if you're a coach, can you talk to somebody who's been in the business for a long time and bounce ideas off of them? Can you talk to even your spouse and just throw in ideas so maybe they give you a different perspective and get you to think about it? And I think that is a big part of being good at your job, no matter what your job is. If you're reflective upon it, it gives you the opportunity to be able to look at what you're doing and determine, hey, is what I'm doing working, or should I be trying to do something else? And the best of the best, I think, spend a lot of time self-evaluating and reflecting and trying to figure out what are the best practices and how can I continue to improve what I do. There's one more area that I want to touch on here, Kevin, and that's the just creating the athlete's learning and engagement environment. And when I think about this, again, I'm not talking about, well, how do you teach how to shoot a layup or how do you teach how to come off a screen? But I'm thinking more about just in terms of, especially for volunteer coaches and people who are new to the profession, of how do you organize a practice? How do you maximize, again, the experience that kids have in a practice setting? I'll give you one example from just my own experiences, and then I'll let you kind of dive in. So one of the things that I'm always amazed by, and I take this for granted in myself, Kevin, as a teacher and somebody who's been, both my parents were teachers. And so I feel like I've been around kids a lot and kind of understand how to manipulate and move and get people to go where they need to be. And I've volunteered at my kids' field day, and parents will be standing there, will be 20 kids, and they're just trying to get the kids into two teams. And I'll watch people struggle, I'm like, you 10 over here, you 10 over, and I can do it in like 3 seconds and I don't even think about it, but I forget that I have tons of experience in doing that. But anyway, so in terms of organizing a practice, like one of the things that we always talk about at camp with coaches is, okay, you're doing a drill and you have 10 kids at your basket. Can you put those 10 kids, instead of in one line with 2 kids participating and 8 kids standing, can you make that 4 lines, or can you make that 3 lines? And maybe you're not directly instructing or watching or coaching those kids, but they're still getting reps instead of standing there. Yeah, you may not be able to watch all 3 groups at the same time, but if you've instructed them and showed them what to do, they're much better off getting those reps. They're much more active. They're much more engaged as opposed to standing in a line. So that's just an example of what are some practices that you guys have seen that work in a practice setting to make the environment better for the kids who are participating.
Oh yeah, Mike, as you were sharing that example, I was thinking back to when I was an early teacher, and our principal at my high school put in like hard and fast rules. And you're teaching high school students, every 20 minutes, you need to change up the mode of learning, the environment, get them moving. And there's science behind it, right? We can look at the way the brain is wired and how it lights up, but like every 20 minutes, almost like put in a hard rule for us as teachers. And I think that is very aligned to what you were just describing. I had other mentors along the way who told me in the classroom, they said, great teaching means that you can walk out of the classroom and the learning still happens. That's when you got a class that is kind of like self-regulating themselves, who's bought in, where everyone has a job and responsibility and knows what they're doing at any given time. And so I think those principles apply here. I've been lucky to personally experience some of the training through the Million Coaches cohort, and see, of course, how they're all working with other organizations across the country. But there's a few really good resources, especially for those volunteer coaches and early ones who aren't making a profession out of this, or they're not earning money and they're driving home from the city after work, just trying to think together a practice plan. Nike and the Olympic Committee put together a resource called How to Coach Kids that really breaks down by age and grade and sport, just some very simple tactics you can use. The Positive Coaching Alliance, who I mentioned, and Center for Healing and Justice have different types of resources depending on the environment you're in. The Park District brings coaches in our community. It's optional, but it's really effective. And I actually think it will be a pull strategy for them as the word gets out that these are really useful trainings, 1 hour trainings. I was a 7-year-old soccer coach this season. I haven't played soccer since the 3rd grade. And so I entered that season. Now, the classic example, like there was no coach, the team might be canceled, a parent needed to step in. And I sat there, I was like, I can coach football, basketball, and baseball, but I can't coach soccer. But there I was. And they just gave very practical sample practice plans they said, don't scrimmage for 45 minutes, right? You need is touches on the ball at this age. Instead of full field scrimmages, do small sided games, 2-on-2, let kids all feel engaged. And so I think those were really critical. Don't spend time, 10 minutes, just stretching and warming. They're 7 years old. You don't need to do that yet. You can get right into an activity after doing your get to know yous. Get into an activity, help them feel some success. Build in the right amount of kind of games for them, and then mock competition like it will be in a game scenario. And so it can be all these ways. These can be resources that we're accessing online. They can be a training I've been a part of on Zoom, or they can be when the Park District says, come to the field on Sunday at 1:00, and we've partnered with the Chicago Fire to run a 1 hour coaching clinic. But those basics that I think apply from 7 to 18 is keep your team moving, help them understand their roles, help them understand why this drill, what it's meant to actually build, both on the field and maybe off the field. That clear communication is essential. We've learned from working with all these partners. And a lot of it ultimately comes back to like our own sense of confidence as coaches to step in. I think about my first year of coaching versus my second year. Some of my practices changed, but the biggest thing that changed was my confidence in the way I delivered everything I was trying to teach. And we, as part of Million Coaches, we worked with the American Institutes for Research to survey about 15,000 coaches across the US. And over 90% of them said that participating in just an introductory coach training significantly increased their confidence as coaches. And that is such an unlock for everything else that needs to come.
Could not agree more. I know that in my own coaching experience that times when I come into a practice with a great practice plan that I've put time into, that I've thought about, that I have looked at exactly what I'm going to do, I deliver a much better practice than when, as you said, I'm driving home from work. Practice time got moved. Maybe I was an assistant coach and all of a sudden my head coach called me and said, hey, I'm not going to be there. Boom, suddenly I'm on the practice field and I've got to try to figure something out and I'm trying to do it on the fly. And I'm not nearly as effective in those situations because I'm not as confident in what it is that I'm trying to teach. And every coach has been there probably at some point, whether you're young and you've grown out of it or whether it's just sometimes there's situations where you're just not able to be prepared for whatever reason. And yeah, the confidence piece I think is huge without question, Kevin. All right. I want to ask you a final 2-part question here before we wrap up. Part 1, when you look ahead over the next year or two, what do you see as being your biggest challenge with the Million Coaches program? And then the second part of the question, when you think about what you get to do every day, what brings you the most joy? So your biggest challenge and then your biggest joy.
The biggest challenge is something we're actively trying to solve for right now with the Million Coaches initiative and community, and that is to bring systems level decision makers to the table. We were talking about that earlier in this fractured and fragmented environment where it's kind of like one organization, everyone's in survival mode in some ways. There is a need to build the grassroots bottom up movement of parents and coaches, and I think we are working towards that. And at the end of the day, a healthy system 5-10 years from now is going to have decision makers at systems level, whether that's within a state or within large youth sports or the national governing body movement. They need to be at the table and feel empowered and resourced and have a clear plan of action, right? Almost plug and play. Like here is the path forward. We need to bring them to the table and help them feel bought in and seen and part of the solution. I think that is a challenge we all need to actively work towards, and we're trying to support some efforts like that over the next couple of years through Million Coaches. The second part of your question, what brings me joy? I mean, personally, it's to see the through line from my childhood to the relationship that it formed with my brothers and my dad and my mom, how it affected me early career and now in this role, to know that the foundation that was built in me when I was 10 years old is allowing me to help support millions more of coaches across the country and organizational leaders through Million Coaches who are just running full speed with all of their charisma and passion to make the experience better for their kids and kids across the community. Like, there's nothing more meaningful and fulfilling than to be able to connect your personal story to your professional one. And I feel blessed every day to do that alongside partners in Million Coaches who feel the same.
Well said. And it sums up a lot of our conversation. Before we get out, Kevin, I want to give you a chance to share. How can people connect with you? How can they find out more about the Million Coaches Challenge? Email, social media, website, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
That sounds great. Well, for anyone who's interested in learning more, the first stop would be go to the website, millioncoaches.org. There you will find the research behind the initiative, the organizations we've supported, the calls to action for system-wide improvements that we're now supporting. So you'll find a host of information there, as well as an email to reach out to Million Coaches that gets directed to the appropriate person inside. You can also follow us on our social channels and any of our individual partners, right? Because each of them are working in different parts of the ecosystem. We are always happy to be connectors. This is ultimately a collective action, and it's a coalition of organizations. And I have the privilege of sitting at the center of this, and more often than not, find the most meaning in connecting folks to the right organizations who want to be a part of it. So millioncoaches.org will be that central hub of information and connection.
Perfect. Kevin, cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule today to join us. Really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening. And we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Great.
Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.